morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are still admitting participants in this meeting room. So just wait for a few minutes. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar and book launch of Decoding the Basi Revolt paintings by Esteban Villanueva. So before we start with the program, please direct your attention to a few of our webinar reminders that was flashed, that is now on the screen. We remind you to turn off your audio and your video during the course of presentations. Okay, certificate of attendance will be sent to the registered email once the feedback form is submitted. So again, good morning, everyone. We will start with the program. Welcome once again to the webinar and book launch of Decoding the Basi Revolt paintings. This webinar and book launch is in commemoration of the 200th anniversary of the creation of the Basi Revolt paintings. So for this first, to start with the program, for her welcome remarks, and as our first speaker for this online lecture entitled Esteban Villanueva's Basi Revolt Paintings, Assessing its Provenance After 200 Years, allow me first to introduce our Deputy Director General for Museums, Dr. Ana Labrador. As Deputy Director General for Museums, at the National Museum of the Philippines, Dr. Ana Maria Teresa Labrador is responsible for research development, museology, and technical assistance. Her role as Chief Curator and Head of Collections Management is to make the National Collections accessible to audiences of 4 flagship museums in Manila and 15 NMPs in different parts of the country. Her latest projects amid the pandemic are the following: physical exhibitions, Larawan at Letrato, photo, oleo, and picture portraits in the Philippines, which opened virtually on October 29, 2020, and the Philippine Center New York Core Collection of 1974, a homecoming exhibition, both at the National Museum of Fine Arts in Manila. She is also supervising installation of exhibitions in 5 regional national museums, 2 of which have been completed on December 15, 2020 and opened March 29, 2021 in Buwak, Marinduque. While some NMPs are still closed or open at limited capacity, she has been working with its digital content team to ensure access to collections, research, and publications. She has published in international journals and edited books on anthropology, art, and museology, while a member of the board of editors of Museum International, Journal of Museum Management and Curatorship, and Journal of Social Museology. Her recent contributions include co-authoring the monograph of the Basi Revolt Paintings 2020, a 200-year-old oil on canvas series of artworks commissioned by Esteban Villanueva, and a chapter in the book Animist Art in Southeast Asia, published in Bangkok by Simeo Spafa in 2021, entitled Babaylan in Philippine Communities, Liminality, Myth, and Inspiration. Dr. Labrador is a social anthropologist and museologist by training, having obtained a PhD from the University of Cambridge in 2000 and an MA in Museum and Gallery Management from the City University of London in 1991. Before joining the NMP, she taught for 22 years at the University of the Philippines at Diliman and Ateneo de Manila University. She is presently a member of the International Council of Museums Standing Committee for Museum Definition, Prospects, and Potentials, which is shaping a new definition for museums worldwide. Friends, let us hear the welcome message and the presentation of Dr. Ana Maria Teresa Labrador.
So good morning, everyone. I'm actually going to read Director General Jeremy Barnes's message to welcome you all. It's a very busy time for us still, despite the pandemic. We are undergoing major reorganization that will see more middle management at the National Museum, and hopefully we can serve you better. So DG Barnes is actually out there meeting with all the concerned stakeholders and also enablers at the Department of Budget and Management. So I'll read these welcome remarks. Good morning, everyone. It is an honor for me to welcome you all to this online lecture and launch of the printed monograph of the Basi Revolt paintings by Esteban Villanueva. This is a corollary activity for the 200th anniversary of the creation of this series of paintings, which are currently exhibited at the National Museum, Ilocos Regional Museum in Vigan, Ilocos Sur. The Basi Revolt series of 14 paintings were declared National Cultural Treasures by the National Museum of the Philippines in 2009. From 2011 to 2014, these paintings were exhibited in the National Museum of Fine Arts and were transferred to our Ilocos Regional Museum in Vigan in 2015. The monograph, The Basi Revolt by Esteban Villanueva, is the second of the National Museum of the Philippines Art, History, and Conservation publication series. The first being the assassination of Governor General Bustamante by Felix Resurrección Hidalgo. Its electronic copy was launched through our social media accounts and website on September 16, 2020, to commemorate the 213th anniversary of the revolt itself that took place in 1807. This monograph also highlights the cultural importance of Basi, an alcoholic drink derived from fermented sugarcane, widely popular in the Ilocos region. At this point, I would like to extend my thanks to our webinar speakers. That's one of them is me. And then the deputy head of our Ilocos Regional Museum and de facto senior museum researcher, Maria Lourdes I. Ingel, and Grimwade Center's senior lecturer at the University of Melbourne, Dr. Nicole Tse, who are also contributors to the publication. With the onset of COVID 19, the National Museum of the Philippines has been doing a series of free webinars as part of its Museum from Home program. Outside Metro Manila, our regional museums, including the Ilocos Regional Museum, are already accepting visitors but with strict health protocols. However, in Manila and Rizal, we are still under community quarantine and our museum facilities are closed to the public for safety and health concerns as we recalibrate our programs to make our services accessible to the public. We hope through these webinars and other online activities we are offering, we continue to engage you in learning more about our heritage. I will not keep you any longer, and I hope that all of you will enjoy and learn a lot about the talks this morning. Thank you for joining us and continue to stay safe and healthy. Okay, so I'll move on with my talk, so that we can actually start off. I'll share my screen. Let's see, start PowerPoint. Okay, so I'll talk about the assessment of the provenance of the paintings after 200 years. So it's the bicentennial of the paintings, no? So that we're commemorating that as well. Allow me to read a little bit from the curatorial notes that I wrote in the publication. In developing the exhibition that features the 14 renowned paintings, the Basi Revolt, which has been attributed to the Basi Revolt paintings, which has been attributed to Ilocano landowner Esteban Pichay Villanueva from Vigan, the National Museum of the Philippines embarked on an art historical and scientific research to help determine their origins and at the same time understand their physical properties before conserving them. It was a challenge as it would go against the long held belief that Villanueva was an artist and of humble origins. We had to appreciate the context in which the paintings have been created beyond what has already been written, such as Spanish colonial authorities commissioning him 14 years after the end of a historical event in 1807 involving an uprising in Ilocos over the Spanish monopoly on Basi, which is a local culturally rooted fermented alcoholic drink made from sugarcane. Many art historians of note, such as the late Dr. Luciano P.R. Santiago, were convinced that the paintings are by Villanueva and one of the earliest surviving record of a local historical event. In his book, The Life, Art, and Times of Damian Domingo, in 2010, Santiago noted that he apparently learned to paint all by himself. In addition, many renowned contemporary artists have cited the Basi Revolt as inspiration for their work. So I'll cite that later on in my presentation. And then the Basi Revolt could be considered having a social life, not due to its age, but also having shuttled recently between Vigan and Manila for temporary exhibitions, not just at the Metropolitan Museum of Manila and then the National Museum of Fine Arts from 2011 to 2015, but also in 2009 at the former Museum of Filipino People, now National Museum of Anthropology, when it was declared National Cultural Treasure. Yet we have no record of their conservation despite the obvious interventions on them, such as paint retouches and modern masonite board reinforcements at the back, in an attempt perhaps to stabilize the oil canvas paintings. Upon closer look, it seems that these paintings lack the consistency of a series done by one artist, and that human figures, horses, and other elements, and Nicole will talk more about this later, seem to have been different artists. These curious notes have led our team to study further through materials analysis and high resolution digital scanning, the results of which are in the publication in the monograph. Whether the Basi Revolt was created by Villanueva or not, as it may have been that he funded and commissioned artists to create the series. They remain unique records of a time when imaging was captured through drawing, painting, or printing. It has captured the imagination of visual artists to the extent of romanticizing and idealizing the event through it, including the comparison with the Stations of the Cross, since there are 14 paintings. Such is the power of visual representation and allows for different interpretations, even though the attempt to fix its narrative is seldom successful. So I will show you some of the features of this slide, and just to also give you an idea of what I'm going to talk about. So there are 5 areas. I would like to introduce them more thoroughly. The importance of analytical framework in trying to understand paintings that are 200 years old. What are art historical sources and references? That it should be part of a continuing dialogue. We also have to develop a visual vocabulary and syntax, and then also how to use contemporary lenses. So it's not just decoding, but making something past present. So this is the cover. Well, that was the original cover that we thought of it, and this is an example of how things can change even in the kind of last minute of before going to print. And then when we had an interaction with some of the important Ilocanos, no, for our anniversary presentation at Ilocos Sur, the Ilocos Regional Museum Complex, one of our eminent Ilocanos, Rene Guatlo, said, "Why are you valorizing the Spaniards?" No, and so we changed the cover to this and highlighting the importance of uh, the 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 people who were part of the revolt. So that's the cover now officially. So just to show you, we have a lot of museums all over the country, and the Basi Revolt paintings are here in the Ilocos Regional Museum and Satellite Office. So, just to introduce to you, that these are the 14 paintings, and they're all there in vegan. And it's really wonderful to be able to go back and forth when I uh, look at them and see new things about them. So, what I'm going to do is give you a timeline of ownership and geographic trajectory because they really matter when we're trying to understand this painting. So it started off that they were found in a storage in the Villanueva home in Vigan. Then they were donated to the provincial government of Ilocos Sur in the 1950s. And it was on loan to the Filipinas Foundation, which renovated, inaugurated the Burgos House in 1975. So I use BRP for short. It was supposed to have been brought also to Manila for display at the Ayala Museum, but we have no record of that. And then in 1989, a 50-year contract of lease was executed by Ilocos Sur Historical and Cultural Foundation, which are the owners of the paintings and the Burgos House. So the conditions in the Burgos House was not optimal for the painting and was displayed in an area with open windows. At one point in the late 1990s and early 2000s, when I go and visit that museum, little did I know that I would someday be part of its management. So they were wrapped in plastic sheets to keep the dust from going to them, which of course is not very helpful. So they were declared national cultural treasures in, I think, 2007, but the exhibition was in 2009. They were brought to Manila to be displayed at the Museum of the Filipino People, and that was that is now the National Museum of Anthropology, and then returned to Vigan the same year. In 2011, they were brought to the National Museum of the Philippines again for study, analysis, and to stabilize it for a special exhibition that was led by the National Archives, Manal. Displayed in late 2011 to early 2012 at the Metropolitan Museum of Manila, and then brought back to the National Museum for exhibition in the FCCP Hall of the National Museum of Fine Arts for further study and decision regarding their conservation if we were going to do some intervention. And then they were returned to vegan in its new space at the old Carcel in 2015, where it continues to occupy its own gallery. So these are some of the pictorial, the images no, that refer to that kind of moving around. So when the Filipinas Foundation documented them, they were in black and white. And this is what is available on their website. In 2009, they were displayed in the Museum of the Filipino People. And they had um, lots of guests, of course, but they had Marcoses there because they actually also showed the Sapin series of Roberto Fileo. No? So that's the uh, Aklasang Basi artwork. And then this was the usual way it was displayed in the Burgos house. No? It was open. And, later on when we were examining the paintings, it had like insect droppings, and dust, lots of dust, and etc. So they were brought to the National Museum and they were cleaned, stabilized, and so uh, and then they were displayed at the Metropolitan Museum in 2011 to 2012 and then returned to the FCCP, to the National Museum of the FCCP Hall. So then later on, we decided in late 2014, to bring them back to Ilocos Sur to be displayed in this new area. So that's the renovated old carcel, no? And then displayed properly in the area. So it's quite nice that there's that space for it dedicated to it. So what were the context of Basi Revolt paintings? No? So the painting's role in the Philippines is actually like a visual aid to understand concepts. No? some people call it propaganda or accidental propaganda to proselytize Christian beliefs, no, like other paintings, especially religious paintings, used to warn future rebels that they will meet the same fate. So there's a practice in that sense. No? And why after 14 years? No? And so we still want to find the answers to that. And then Esteban Villanueva, was he a painter or the commissioner of the artworks? So this is supposed to be also one of the early examples of secular painting. And then we have to make comparisons with other works that have been commissioned. So in this sense, the introduction of European painting to the Philippines through religious art offered a vocabulary and a way of articulating something Filipino in a new idiom or something native in a new idiom, allowing them to imagine themselves as visually empowered. This empowerment would have begun when local artists were allowed to paint without restrictions from the church following an edict from the Spanish King Carlos III in 1785. This promoted opportunities for artistic expression, to chronicle events, and more importantly, to gain economic advantage. Whereas in the past, local artists were limited by having to work within the confines of church patronage, the secularization of art created other prospects for representation. Artists found other ways of constructing their images, much less hampered by faithfully copying European models. As a result, more artists developed painting skills that satisfied the demands of a new economic class. Members of this class engaged in vigorous commercial trade and travel in the 1860s after the opening of the Suez Canal. The shorter route also meant that the luxury goods such as art materials and European works of art were more quickly transported. So just to give you an idea, no, with the kind of religious art, no, they usually use this kind as like an either an aid memoir or visual like a way of teaching the believers, no, and usually a big painting like this by Jose Dance, yeah, in Paete would make those people who are who have installed this in the church had made sure that the lower part, this is heaven, earth, and hell, no, would be the lower part would be would be the eye level of the people who would look at it, and then this whole idea of looking up to the heavens, no, and aspiring for that. But if you don't behave, you will it will be sure that you will go to hell. So another thing, the reason why we think it's commissioned, it's been standard practice in the past, especially in the 18th century, no, and then to early 19th century, to engage artists to do this, especially when paintings went beyond religious themes. So this is Juan de Collar's illustration. It's attributed to him, but actually he did not do the artworks. And you will see that we're still actually examining this, that there are different hands, no, in a way in creating this artworks. No? And then this is cigarillas. The other one was rimas, and this is Acapulco. That's the candle plant. So it's quite interesting that these are some of the things that have to be looked into. We also in 2011, with the help of our good friend Eliza Agabian, we went around. We met the descendants of Esteban Villanueva, and this is he's not a simple farmer. He was not a simple farmer. He was actually part of the mestizo elite. And it also says in his birth certificate and also in his death certificate. And they actually have a coat of arms as well. No? So he was quite well off. They were quite well off. So this was in 2011 when we were interviewing the descendant of Esteban Villanueva. And then, of course, in the vegan cathedral, I mean, who gets to get um, their bones interred in the vegan cathedral? No, so it's not a simple farmer. So and then he died 80 years old, and no other artworks were available, even looking around vegan or beyond. So one area why I think people thought that Esteban Villanueva was a painter. Maybe there's like something that was lost in translation. There was another Esteban Villanueva who was Esteban Villanueva y Vinarao, who was a Filipino Spanish painter but born in 1859 in Manila and died in Spain in Alicante in 1920. He was active between 1875 and 1881, so it can't be him. No? So these are some of his paintings that are found in Prado. And actually, if you go and Google his name, you will find that he's been actively traded in the auction houses. So what analytical framework should we use? So from our publication, we actually saw that that this 200-year geographic trajectory of the Basi Revolt paintings is fragmented, and so too is their analysis. And their numerous changes in ownership and environmental care have resulted in damage and degradation, leading to visual uncertainties and possible art historical misinterpretations. It could also be argued that given the accurate depiction of events, greater clarity could be achieved through their conservation to strengthen the social and historical evidence. In 2014, it was therefore timely to investigate the Basi Revolt paintings at the National Museum of the Philippines to clarify uncertainties, create knowledge, and inform conservation actions. No? So this, so we had to subject it to all these, and then the question is, with all these interventions on the paintings, are they authentic? So we did have a session with the National Institute of Physics, and they were able to use this scanner to see what was beyond the surface of the painting. So, um, so, what are art historical sources and references that can help in examining paintings such as these? No? Now that we've moved to digital content, no, and putting things in a digital platform, and we hope really by this year, the end of this year, we could put as much as possible our collections online with our new website that's going to be launched in June. So it's important to actually engage in content curation. This is one such model. And I think it's very useful to be able to do that. It's also important to deal with interdisciplinary approaches. So especially shared decision making, it cannot be just, for instance, your conservator deciding. It has to be discussed. So it's very important to look at the museum context, so research and continuing programs rather than, the end product of making a painting beautiful for exhibition, but later on might have issues. No? The question of whether the intervention could cause the loss loss of authenticity. Should we leave it the way it was but stabilize instead? Could we implicate paint losses as part of the story? No? So, and then what about the public's view? No? The loss of patina means loss of authenticity for some of them, no? And they get very angry actually. So, it's a long, I think you have to just be prepared to kind of look at this in long terms. Now, in 1999, I began my query about the Basi Revolt paintings and published part of that in an ANU, Australian National University, um, publication on humanities research. And then we worked with Nicole and Dr. Soriano from the NIP to look at again, the decision making processes of whether or not to conserve the paintings. And then, of course, this very important monograph for us, it's almost a handbook. And we hope that it could be part of the long term um, kind of work in progress. And then we start also trying to compare some of the paintings to around that period. This is an 1850 Via Crucis, from Bohol, and we don't know who the Bohol master was. But it's really trying to find out. And we have a project that will come out in terms of an exhibition towards the end of the year, focusing on blue and red pigments. No, so we'll uh, announce that eventually. So, in developing a visual vocabulary and syntax, it's like putting together like a dictionary. When you're examining this artworks like this, so you have to kind of think, you know when to look. Is it because we're in a museum setting, we're able to go back and forth and decide, could we regularly monitor it and to see if there are some obvious physical differences. No? So how to look at it also, what to look for, what paradigm or lenses to use, so we do not just look but also see, which is a difference. And how has the Basi Revolt paintings been represented, regarded, and even disputed? No? So, what we've done as a strategy for the exhibition of the, the Basi Revolt paintings was to create a context. So we recontextualized it. No, although there was no known exhibition when actually Esteban Villanueva commissioned those 14 paintings. No? So what we've done is to look at why Basi was so important to the Ilocanos, and to, of course, the Ilocanos know that, no, but other people don't, and why would they revolt, for that? So we showed all these different aspects of it, the processes. We looked at also what kind of botanical specimens they use, like the type of sugar cane. We looked at also the trade, when the trade and exchange, like this piece of cloth on the left is so important. It comes from Abra, and it's actually embroidered and looks at the different means of trade between the Ilocanos and those from Abra, which is the closest indigenous group uh, in the borderline. No? So also, I want to kind of stress this idea that why our eyes are always kind of accustomed to certain things, like especially the features of neglect. That's what I call it. So I'll give you some example. No, so like this ruin of a building at the Fort Pilar in Zamboanga City, it's a result of neglect but accepted as the look of antiquity. So a lot of people see this as patina of age, as the public's eyes become accustomed to it. No, and this redounds to our decision not to do interventions on the Basi Revolt paintings. So there's also the shock of restoring buildings to their original intent, in this case, as military barracks, but also adaptive reuse for museum exhibitions, because we want to be able to maintain temperature and humidity in them. And then, of course, emotions ran high, fueled by certain politicians. And they weaponized the whole project, that they sent death threats to our director general. So this is the ruin, no, of that building. And in fact, we will be installing very soon the maritime and marine specimens around found around the Sulu Sea. So this is how it looks now, and the locals were up in arms, and they said that we ruined its antiquity. But you see, we cannot enshrine neglect. That was neglect. This 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 feature, because our predecessors didn't care about it. So we wanted to make sure that we look after it and make use of the space. So most recently, in Pawai, the Pawai Church, no, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. There were lots of comments on the FB and other social media about loss of patina, loss of authenticity. The exposed bricks we're accustomed to that. But that's not a good thing, because these are unreinforced uh, built heritage. No, they need lime and plaster, or cement plaster. So, in the 70s, of course, the exposed brick was in vogue, and that was contrived to. A lot of buildings had kind of like a chip on them and exposed the brick. So, I mean, you can see that in vegan. And so, this is how it looked before the restoration. Actually, a lot of bricks were falling off already from the bell tower. It was dangerous. And then this is how it looks now. And we all feel that the National Historical Commission did a good job at it. But my goodness, if you look at the social media comments about it, it's like, the NHCP, our colleagues at the NHCP didn't know what they were doing. So this is the last bit. Sorry, I'm kind of running over. So we need to use also contemporary lenses. We want to make them past, present for future generations. No? So we do need a means of decoding the Basi Revolt paintings. No? We have to look at different possible ways of understanding it through art criticism, analysis, time-based or events-based responses. Like, for instance, the National Quincentennial Commission has been doing a lot of these things for certain um, uh, programs, no, and then you know the bicentennial could be also one way of doing that. We have to keep renewing interest, no, and we need to also uh, discuss and talk to each other about this. We feel that this is still a work in progress. So Arnold Azurin calls the Basi Revolt paintings reckless fantasy. Newspaper called it accidental propaganda, and things like that. And they can. This is the wonderful thing about artworks. No? You could actually understand them on different levels. So I'll just show you some of the artworks. This is Robert Fileo's Aklas and Basi. And it's quite interesting because this was done in 2006, part of his Sapin Sapin series using painted plywood. And then actually later on in 2015, he had this exhibition using glue, eggshell, and sawdust, and this was displayed in the art fair in Makati, and then later on at the Vargas Museum. So, and then he called this mito ng aklasang Basi. So it became a myth for him. And then this one is by Mark Cosico, Mga Mandirigma ng Basi, which is also done in 2015 and displayed now in the Pidig Municipal Hall. He said that this was inspired by the ninth panel, but reversing the narrative that is opposite the pro-Spanish image. Okay. So, and then also this one, Antipas de Lotavos, Agos ng Ilog, Bantaway. And it was also done in 2015, oil on canvas. And this was, both of them, this was their, where they took off from that. So that was the encounter of that the particular event. Okay, so a lot of people ask us, oh, why don't we display them in next to the Basi Revolt paintings? Why not create like this dialogue and stuff like that? Well, what we feel is that it's not curatorially fit, no, because these paintings have been commissioned for a specific purpose. These three big, large artworks, and they were actually commissioned by the provincial government of Ilocos Norte, and it was supposed to be like their own kind of series of Basi Revolt paintings, no? And that's the reason why they were all done in 2015 until 2016 because of that commission, and they are all there now. But I know that the only one that's on display is that one in Pidig with Mark Cosico's 10 feet tall painting, no? And so these the ones that there are of Esteban Villanueva is actually quite small, quite they're like windows, no, to a certain portal, no, of something that we should continue to understand, both socially and also visually, and also the painting traditions in the Philippines. No, why the Chinese clouds incorporated in some of the paintings? Why the comet? Why the palm leaf? No, there's so much to know still. But this is my last slide. But the real reason is that you can have moments like this in the gallery. No, this is our Department of Education Secretary Leonor Briones, who went there before the pandemic and really appreciated the kind of engagement that she had with the painting. Outside it's very busy, people are always kind of busy with the song and dance that you find in the social media. But I think it's really quite important that having this in the museum and being able to see something new every time you look at it is really quite a precious thing. So thank you so much. Maraming salamat, and always take care. Be careful. The pandemic, the coronavirus is still out there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Labrador, for your extensive presentation tackling the
I
various.
think I I think Danilin will get angry with me because I just went over. So sorry. Thank you. I will get my fine later.
Okay, so to our participants, I believe that you have a lot of questions, but please reserve your questions later for the open forum. So let us proceed with our second speaker, second presenter, Maria Lourdes Aingel. Allow me to introduce her first. An anthropologist, Malot Ingel worked in various development and cultural projects within and outside Ilocos, under local and international government and or non-government organizations before her hiring at the NMP for its Ilocos Regional Museum in 2018. The bulk of her work during the last 12 years was on Ilocos heritage, particularly in her home province, Ilocos Sur, and the last before the NM being the Swiss Network for International Studies funded research on world heritage and human rights in the Asia Pacific. That included her home city, Vigan. Her encounter with the Basi Revolt paintings began as a 7-year-old in the public school across the Burgos house, having been included among the first groups of children taken to visit the Ayala Museum in Vigan when it opened in 1975. Her significant connection with the paintings, however, only began in 2011 as she was part of the Ilocos Sur Provincial Government Heritage Team that was tasked to work for the National Museum in various initiatives. Since June last year, she has been monitoring and undertaking simple upkeep of the Basi Revolt paintings as part of her tasks at the NM Ilocos.
Friends, let us welcome Maria Lourdes Ingal with her lecture entitled 200 Years of Conveying, Stories in the Making.
Maraming salamat, Dan. So, bahala ka na talaga sa slides ko, ha? Hello? Naririnig po ba ako?
Naririnig po.
So, okay lang. Paki-prompt na lang ako pagka may problem. Okay, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. So, I just actually prepared the paper so I won't forget anything that of the things that I wish to share. For this webinar, I was originally tasked to discuss local history, which I understood was that surrounding the series of 14 artworks on canvas that the National Museum of the Philippines declared as National Cultural Treasure in 2009. Immediately thinking about the Basi Revolt itself, and not yet the paintings, not really the paintings yet, I was honest enough to express my uncertainty. I don't really have the K or the capacity to talk about local history. I'm not a historian, okay? Dr. Labrador said I could share about what we're planning for this year's commemoration of the paintings and its significance to the local community and its importance also for young people. So maybe I can come up with something. Given this assignment, plus related information and insights that I thought might be relevant to local history or at least maybe of interest to us, my simple sharing for this webinar will thus include the following. First, for some backgrounder, let's have a few tidbits about the painter and the paintings. Then I'll briefly share with you the commentary series on the Basi Revolt paintings that we had for the NM Ilocos Facebook page in September last year. And next, I'll also share a few insights on how the paintings are interpreted, kind of explaining why we can expect more stories in the making. And lastly, about current projects and prospects around the paintings that we can consider pursuing in the near future. I gave the title 200 Years of Conveying Stories in the Making to my sharing given its content. So we're going to the first topic. What do we know of this guy whose name E. Villanueva is inscribed on the paintings that depict the 1807 historical event earlier known in the Ilocos as El Alzamiento de Ambaristo or Ambaristo Revolt? Esteban Villanueva was from Vigan, having been born here in September 1797. He was a mestizo. His paternal grandfather was Miguel Villanueva. My good friend Emma, a direct descendant of Esteban, shared that Miguel came from Catalonia in northeastern Spain. Esteban's mother, Justa Pichay, was on the other hand of Chinese ancestry, as her last name suggests. Esteban was 10 years old when the Ambaristo Revolt took place in 1807. And we see that the paintings indelibly linked with him are dated 1821. Thus, he undertook the project when he was 24 years old. Was the young man designing the series based on what he personally witnessed? What was his purpose? This we have yet to know. Interestingly, it was also in 1821 that Esteban's father, Placido, died at the young age of 49. Now, I personally wonder if Placido or his death had something to do with Esteban embarking on the project. When you go to the Vigan Cathedral, you'd find Esteban's tombstone along the wall on the left side, as Dr. Labrador already said. This is near the altar. From there, we know that he died at the age of 80 in January 1878. Anyway, except for the common knowledge that Esteban was the painter or architect of the paintings done in 1821, most people know nothing more of him. Information written about him by a few scholars that are yet to be known by most people include the following. Esteban was recognized as an honest merchant who sold quality articles, among them prints and paper, in a bazaar. Supreme Court Justice Ignacio Villamor featured him in his book Industrious Men in 1932. We understand that the guy Esteban made great fortune from his trade, one that his forebears probably started and his descendants apparently continued. Months ago, my former research teammate, historian Professor James Ligero of UPLB, was so kind to share with me what he found, a literary piece authored by Esteban. It is an Iloco Dalot, published in his memory by his grandchildren in 1935, then at its second printing. The lot is an Iloco oral tradition where actors deliver a story comprising poetic lines by chanting alternately. So, despite the fact that there's this looming question about why we couldn't find any other visual artwork that was done by Esteban, we know that he was a successful businessman and a literary artist. Now, how about the paintings? There is a huge gap in knowledge between the completion of the paintings in 1821 and the 1950s, which should challenge us to pursue more research. Remarkably, from archival sources dated between 1835 and 1847 that were translated by the National Archives and provided to me for an essay 9 years ago, we see proof that the Spanish government and church authorities continued to argue for or against the reimposition of restrictions on the manufacture of Basi. And we don't know how the paintings stood or how they were used, if ever, during that period. Nonetheless, we could gather the following information about the paintings from the 1950s onwards. After an affidavit submitted in court by a lawyer kin of Esteban, Attorney Paz Lajos Argel, in February 1976 suggests that the paintings were stored in the bodega of one of the Villanueva houses until the 1950s. You see, the family is really rich. They own a string of ancestral houses in Vigan. It was brought to the provincial capital of Ilocos Sur, and that was in the 1950s. Although contrary claim was also filed in court, what eventually held sway was that the descendants of Esteban Villanueva donated the set of paintings to the provincial government for a token payment of 500 pesos in the 1950s. What has also become part of the narrative of the Basi Revolt paintings is that they were displayed during fairs or the carnaval and in other special events. We have seen this in the testimony of Lajos Argel, as well as in the one filed also in court by claimant Dr. Bello in 1976. Whether or not this practice of exhibiting the paintings during festivals was a continuing function from the Spanish period is a probability that we do not really have evidence of as of today. But anyway, while they were held by the provincial government, the paintings were displayed at our provincial library, the Gregoria M. Rivera Memorial Library and Museum, which was named after the mother of President Elpidio Quirino. This was from around the late 1950s until 1975 when they were transferred to the then newly established Ayala Museum of Vigan, which was the Burgos House. The series was soon donated with the deed of donation completed in June 1976 by the provincial government of Ilocos Sur to the Filipinas Foundation, which ran the Ayala Museum. The rest is known local and national history by now. Dr. Labrador also mentioned this earlier. The paintings, along with the Burgos House and collections therein, were donated by the Filipinas Foundation to the Ilocos Historical and Cultural Foundation in 1988. Just months later, in 1989, the Burgos House and its contents, the paintings included, were transferred to the care of the National Museum of the Philippines on lease for 50 years. I think everyone would agree that we are all happiest that the series of paintings were collectively declared as national cultural treasure in 2009 or earlier 2007, sabi nga ni Dr. Labrador kanina, as they were recognized for their significance both as the only series of artworks in the country that depict a historical event and as testament to a phase in the history of Philippine art. With more government support now for the paintings, the National Museum could undertake more activities around this priceless national collection. In 2011, the paintings were taken to Manila for conservation and also for exhibition. Before the conservation work commenced, it became part of the exhibition conscription, imagining and inscribing the Ilocano world, that was spearheaded by the provincial government of Ilocos Sur and the National Archives. They were also exhibited at the National Museum of Fine Arts. The Basi Revolt paintings finally came home to Vigan in January 2015 and installed in its permanent home, the old Carcel Museum, the National Museum, Ilocos Regional Museum Complex, which was inaugurated on January 30, 2015. The opening of the complex came at a time when the popularity of Vigan as a World Heritage Site surged anew because it was declared as one of the new 7 wonder cities of the world in December 2014. You can just imagine how since then, until the pandemic, the paintings and all of the museum complex enjoyed up to over 1,000 visitors per day during peak days. The smaller number would be like 150 to 200 per day. That's during the very lean season. Okay, what is the impact of this national cultural treasure to the public, and how are they seen by our local communities? I think that rather than the numbers, these are the more important elements that we have to constantly look into. And the bicentennial of the artworks is a great opportunity for us to unravel these questions. How could we proceed under this pandemic? Let me go back a bit to 2020 so you can also have an idea of how we are coming up with projects and activities at the Ilocos Regional Museum and the synergies that they entail, especially as the pandemic has forced us to shift gears and adapt. Because we could no longer pursue an earlier proposed lecture on the paintings and the Basi Revolt, our museum guide, Leo Masuli, submitted a proposal in August 2020 for a social media campaign for the Road to the Basi Revolt Paintings Bicentennial. Leo, who at 26 is the youngest among us regular staff at the regional museum, has a bachelor's degree in history. Understandably, he proposed a commentary series that would generate discussion on the relevance and veracity of the paintings as a historical source in the historiography of the 1807 Basi Revolt. At our level in the regional museum, we approved of this proposed awareness campaign that we would have on our Facebook page, envisioning notable historians from academic institutions in Manila and in the region writing commentaries focused on one painting per day. Our Deputy Director General for Museums, Dr. Ano Labrador, obviously saw the potential of such campaign, but with a critique of our proposal's perspective. Instead of focusing on academics and on the expected historiographic exercise that could take the spotlight away from these art treasures whose bicentennial we are celebrating, she wanted us to take this campaign, this opportunity to a different level. I would like to quote what Dr. Labrador wrote in her guidance to us. Maybe don't ask questions pertaining to the credibility of the Basi Revolt paintings as a historical source or document. The beauty of art is that the intention of the painter does not necessarily follow the interpretation of those who behold it or appreciate it. We can all seek our own level in understanding images. Therefore, as we would appreciate later, we had our commentary series from September 16 to 30, 2020, engaging more kinds of people, especially more Ilocanos from different places, backgrounds, and perspectives, as we completed the list that Dr. Labrador initially suggested to us. We still had academics, historians, and social scientists in the select set, but we had more. We had 17 in all. They are all remarkable people in their own fields or stations: artist, storyteller, gardener, grandmother, physician, priest, educator, writer, lawyer, and so on. But instead of being a whole breed apart from most museum audiences, the non-academics among them share this commonality with many of us and our visitors. They have only basic knowledge of the Basi Revolt and of the circumstances of the paintings. We sent each of them 2 photos of 2 different panels in the series, but we requested them to try to focus on only one. We could see that their commentaries are of readings and of feelings emerging from their focus on the figures, the mood, and the captions, the Spanish original of which are right at the bottom of the canvas. And though we noted that some of their readings and feelings were similar, this reflected the personal contexts of the contributors in time and space, their own experiences and inclinations. For now, let me cite a few of them. Ms. Emeline Versosa, former Executive Director of the Philippine Commission on Women and direct descendant of Esteban, was featured first in the series. Noting the absence or passive presence of women in the painting, she had this to say apart from the excerpts that you see on the slide now. Where are the women in the paintings? Where were the women during this uprising, invisible and hidden in their homes, going about their usual household chores, caring for the wounded and mourning the dead? We had also 2 artist sisters sharing similar thoughts as they pondered on the message and the leaning that the artist wanted to convey. And I quote one of them, Miss Althea Balmes. It is not uncommon for artists to include symbolism that subverts the propaganda nature of the work they are commissioned. If it is true that this piece was commissioned by the Spanish colonizers, I'd like to imagine that Villanueva was an artist empathic to the cause. Writer Mr. Rene Guatlo, on the other hand, eloquently brings to the fore the irony of Ilocanos fighting their own. I quote him, "Unlike Jesus, who was helped by a random stranger, the rebels from the north were subdued by their fellow Ilocanos. It is the misfortune of many a rebel and many a prophet that he is not acknowledged in his own land. This too is gospel truth." The last commentary by neurologist and art historian, art patron, Dr. Hoven Kwanang, gives us these emotion-filled thoughts. That it ended in tragedy brings me to a troubled silence. And as a physician who has seen many patients die, I ponder, as we always do in our scientific discipline, to consider a critical question. Why did we fail? We have compiled these commentaries and are now working on the layout for their publication. So we're not going to spoil your excitement by not sharing more of this now. We are targeting to publish at least the ebook in September 2021, also in time of the 214th anniversary of the 1807 Basi Revolt. Though if through it, we honor both the nationally significant upheaval that notably shook the Spanish colonial administration, as well as the series of paintings that depict it. With the interpretations that we can gather from our museum audience and now from the commentaries, we cannot imagine enough the thoughts and stories brought home by generations before us who had beheld the Basi Revolt paintings. The stories are as varied as they could be, for sure. What with 200 years of conveying? That's about 8 generations over 2 centuries, and we surely have more stories in the making. What story would you make of that comet that appears in several panels, for instance? If I am to refer to my experience in guiding visitors in the gallery, very few people know of the old belief that my mother told me as a child. But my sharing that the comet is an omen of war, pestilence, famine, disaster would become part of the listener's narrative. What would you make of that white, dominant, leaf-like figure on two of the panels? I have always perceived it like anyone else who have not read any literature on the paintings. It is a palm, palmera. No. But don't be surprised if someone tells you it's a comet or the tail of a comet, because that's how some scholar wrote it. Indeed, different people will, as Dr. Labrador says, seek their own level in understanding the images. Thus, it is part of our task in the museum to surface, document, and convey these interpretations. Doubtless, the task is daunting, especially when we have to watch out against tendencies to privilege dominant voices. As much as it is our responsibility to always read up on and cite the published, it is even greater a responsibility to put our communities and the museum-going public's lenses into the frame. So, what more can we do to maximize the potential of the paintings in promoting appreciation and justice to both the artworks and the history that they portray? Apart from the publication whose prints we are launching today and the commentaries that we hope to publish come September, the NMP has already begun discussions for the making of a video film on the paintings, also for launching within this bicentennial. We all recognize the unfortunate dearth of material on both the Revolt and the artworks. Lately, my good friend and fellow Ilocos heritage worker, Lisa Gabin, gave me a link to a 2014 blog that presents detailed information on Native and Mestizo personalities involved in the revolt and the uprising itself. The blogger was calling the author or people in the know to come forward, as the supposed original reference in the library from which the paper was copied could no longer be found. Thus, we became wide-eyed when Dr. Labrador brought up the idea of a research on the Basi Revolt trail, imaginably a multidisciplinary one that should entail archival research, oral history, archaeology, even ethnology, to track pieces about this revolt from the mountains of Pidig in Ilocos Norte, down south to Bantaway in what is now San Vicente, and Vigan. Back to the paintings, Dr. Labrador also recently conceptualize the Pula at Bughaw exhibition. She mentioned this earlier. No? And we wonder if somehow the painting scholars could also be included. Truly, there are a lot of possibilities and a lot of work to do, so there is no time to waste. To conclude my slot now, I'd like to share with you that days before the seminar, I asked my niece, Malaya, for me to know how she perceives the paintings. I took her to the old carcel on the afternoon after the inauguration in 2015. She is now 20 years old, within the same age range as that of a large, if not the largest part of our museum audience. I learned that she has come to the museum with friends at least 5 times after her first visit. I am happy that, unlike me, who was barely attracted by the flat, color-thin paintings when I was a young student, she appreciates the Basi Revolt paintings as they are. Because, as she says, may kwento, it has a story, and that artworks come in different styles. The images that affect her most, expectedly, are those where torture and death are shown. Does she not see the punished as enemies of the state, considering what the caption suggests? Never, she replied. She actually feels for them. Through her certain answer, I become more convinced that indeed it is possible that the architect of the paintings may have consciously or subconsciously coded the series in such a way that it is sympathetic to our insurgent forebears. But my niece admits that until now, her understanding of the revolt and the paintings are bound within those that she understands of the images and captions. She thinks that this is because even in history class, they don't really discuss the Basi revolt. So up to now, maliit lang. No? We can argue that while the Ambaristo or Basi revolt has not been as appreciated as the big-time events and big-time figures in Philippine history are, the Basi Revolt paintings are the most influential material that imprints this significant historic episode into people's consciousness. And that, for us at the museum, is an opportunity to seize. Yun lang po. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Mama Lot, for that wonderful presentation, tackling your personal encounter with these national cultural treasures, the impacts of these paintings to the people of Vigan, as well as your experience in doing the Basi commentary series. So, again, your questions will be read after the last presenter. So, allow me to present to you Dr. Nicole Tsi. Okay. Our last speaker is Dr. Nicole Tsi. Is part of the research and teaching team at the Greenwade Center for Cultural Materials Conservation, the University of Melbourne. Her research focuses on the development and support of regionally relevant conservation approaches for works of art in tropical Southeast Asia, under the auspices of APCARN, Asia Pacific Tropical Climate Conservation Art Research Network. In 2017, Dr. Tsi was an IIAS-affiliated fellow at the University of Leiden, Netherlands from September to November 2017 and co-convened a meeting on natural disasters and cultural heritage in the Philippines, knowledge sharing, decision-making, and conservation in Tagbilaran City and towns on the island of Bohol. With the National Museum of the Philippines, Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization Regional Center for Archaeology and Fine Arts, or CIMAYAS-PAFA. With a strong commitment to cultural materials conservation and tropical climates, Dr. Tsi is a co-founding member of APCARN and has co-convened 4 international meetings in Malaysia, Thailand, Taiwan, and the Philippines since 2009, with a membership growing to over 100 members, drawn from institutions across the Asia Pacific and active collaborations. Since 2013, Dr. Tsi has been the chief editor of the AICCM Bulletin, the Australia Institute for Cultural Materials Conservation's peer-reviewed journal published by Rutledge Taylor and Francis. So for her presentation titled Ways of Knowing, Cultural Materials Conservation, and Esteban Villanueva's Basi Revolt Paintings of Ilocos, let us hear from Dr. Nicole C.
Thank you, Dadelan, for a very warm welcome. And first, I would like to acknowledge country. I am presenting here from Melbourne, Australia. So I'd like to acknowledge the elders of this land, the Wurundjeri people, and of course, acknowledge the Indigenous communities where people are enjoying this talk. Now, on Tuesday, we did a technical run, and what happened was that my PowerPoint kept dropping in and out because I'm coming from Australia. And I do understand, Dadelan, that I have sent you the recording that I did earlier this morning. Is that correct, Dadelan?
Yes,
So, Dadelan, are we planning to play the recording in case my Wi-Fi drops out?
Yes.
Yes, we are. Okay. So first, I'd like to thank everyone for inviting me, National Museum, the provincial government of Ilocos, for allowing me to work with these paintings. It has been very rewarding and a great pleasure. So as I said, we have a recording, but I will remain online and take any questions at the end of it. So do enjoy. And thank you, Dadelan. Are we going to put the recording on, Dadelan, or? Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you. Hello again. Now for my recorded presentation. I'll first share my screen and put this onto the full screen mode. So welcome everyone. Today I'm going to talk about ways of knowing, cultural materials conservation, and Esteban Villanueva's Basi Revolt paintings of Ilocos. Now you can think of cultural materials conservation as a window into humanity. They tell stories and they're so connected to identity and the history. When we look closely at these 14 Basi Revolt paintings, they are intriguing. They are real life events about rebellion, authority, colonisation, propaganda, and a real people that have made history. But what if the message and the imagery in the paintings is unclear and cannot be understood? They are lost as historical, social, and political documents without meaning and may become aestheticised, aesthetic, static objects. The role of conservation then is to provide access and ensure they can exist as active documents that contribute to the historical and social record. So today I'm going to talk about ways of knowing the Basi Revolt paintings through the lens of conservation, and to share what I know from my very short but very privileged position of working with them. What knowledge can conservation contribute to other forms of knowledge, as we heard today, to ensure their meaning remains relevant? So here are the Basi Revolt paintings that were at the National Museum for 2 years, from 2012 to 2014. I arrived into the Philippines in October 2013 as a research fellow. And when I was first introduced to the paintings to jointly undertake some conservation research, digitisation and image analysis, I must admit I knew a little bit about the Basi Revolt paintings, but I didn't really know how critically important they are to the identity and history of the people. Now I do, and today's talks definitely show this. And I'm very thankful to the National Museum and the provincial government of Ilocos for allowing me to work on them. Then, at the end of 2014, the paintings were then transferred to the new museum complex, which you heard about today. So, the Basi Revolt paintings, as you know, are national cultural treasures, and they're movable cultural treasures. You know that there are 14 works that depict a protest on the ban of local manufacture of traditional wine and recount an important moment in history, when the Indigenous insurgents fought against the Spanish governor and powers but were punished for their upheavals. They tell an important story and stories of propaganda. They represent nation building and historical records in themselves, detailing these events. So who are these people in these images? When we look at some of the identities in the image through technical examination and microscopy in conservation, there are lots of questions around the imagery and iconography and being able to understand who is who in the pictures. Some questions are, as you look at these pictures, is what is the ideal state? How should the paintings look when they were first painted or at different stages of their lifetime? What do the overpainted areas, like we see here, and cleaned areas, say about the stages of conservation and care of these paintings? Does it say something about the way they are valued? What do the damages like holes, exposed canvas, tonal changes say about the care and the environments they were stored in? Are the inscriptions correct? Are the details like the birds, comets, trees, are they visual identifiers of time? Are there intended modifications like the plants, like the pants on the insurgents? What does this say about the authorities of the time and their ideal of civil society? So to answer some of those questions, we need to know what is the original surface and what are modifications or adaptations to the surface over time. And this is a typical way in which we do that. We interpret damage through cultural materials conservation. Here you can see two images and you can see the amount of overpaint, meaning there have been adaptations and reworking over the surface. And across the two paintings, it is quite considerable. So questions are whether to reinstate the painting to its original form when first painted, or to reinstate and to retain all of the adaptations and biography of the object over time, and to retain those as a measure of value and to say something about society at the time. So in unravelling the materiality of these paintings, we are thinking about the way evidence is built, assessed and correlated, and they're really important issues. And how much variation there is across the painting and who should do the assessing about what evidence, visual evidence counts and what methods should actually be used. So this is an approach some people use in conservation. We are looking at the originality and the object biography. And two quotes here from Gerard Headley. In paintings which have undergone significant changes, we cannot any longer have the artist's original intent. Old paintings simultaneously incorporate changes that are seen as loss, such as faded pigments and changes that have become cultural signifiers of the passage of time. So the question is, how can the passage of time contribute to the biography of the object and the painting? What does it say about its past and its care? What would you say is visually acceptable passage of time? And what do we think is damage, as in loss and a negative attitude, versus restoration and what should be kept? So we're thinking through some of these evidence and we're thinking about what is verifiable evidence? What evidence can contribute to some of these questions? We use conservation science, we use technical examination, but really importantly is to collaborate with other forms of knowledge, archival knowledge, art historical, curatorial, ethnography, etc., as we heard today. With this, we had quite a few questions, as I just talked about, and we had quite a few discussions. Some of the questions were, how many hands have produced the Basi Revolt paintings? Was this a series produced in a workshop and signed by a senior artist or a commissioner? Is it the same hand which has produced these paintings? Is there consistency across these paintings? What is the authentic surface, the ideal surface, the original surface, and the altered surface? What are the material limitations of the ideal surface? And are there any alternative treatments apart from cleaning the paintings, intervening with the physical fabric of the painting, such as digital reconstructions? Now, as you heard earlier today, there is lots of information about the historical documentation and provenance. And part of what we're thinking about in terms of correlating information to the physical fabric is thinking about what were the artistic influences before 1821, when the paintings were painted, what materials were available in their production, and do they exist in these particular paintings, what training opportunities were around. And there is some art historical evidence about possible workshops not far at Sir Vincent's workshop, and there being a furniture maker nearby. And then, of course, there's those very beautiful four bishops' portraits in Vigan as well. And did they have some influence? Another thing too was thinking about academic training models that were available to artists at the time. We do know that there was Damien Domingo, who had set up the academy in Manila, and that was first at his home in 1821, and then later on an Academy of Drawing in 1823. How did these events affect the production of these paintings? They're at the same time in Manila, but Manila is still a very long way from Vigan at the time. We didn't have aeroplanes then. What is the role of the Chinese? They were involved in a lot of craft making traditions of the time. Was there some involvement in these production? So we have historical documentation about the artist, Esteban Villanueva, his date of birth. He was baptized in 1797, so we do know that his date of birth is 1797. So in 1821, when the paintings were produced, he was 24 years of age. So the question is, someone of 24 years of age, do they have the capacity to produce and the artistic expertise to produce such a painting? Those are some of the questions we were thinking about. A key way to think about provenance and attribution of a painting is always to look at the signatures and to think about, is it an original marking or a non-original marking? And then we also did some analysis of the pigments of those signatures and a technical examination. So here's some macroscopic images of the signatures. Some of them are obviously later additions, like we have here. But then here, they are probably later additions plus time, because we have cracks through these areas. Then we have evidence of original varnish. You can see these little brown dots here. They're reticulated little bits of varnish. So that's telling you something about the original surface at the time of production. And then we have some areas where the paint has been solubilized completely down to the canvas support, as here we see here, and there has been reworking over the top. So this is indicative of later adaptations, whereas this one here may in fact be an original marking of the signature. Looking more at some of the inscriptions, you can see this as a larger view. They're looking at cracks through surfaces because they tell you if they are age cracks and have been there for some time. Obviously here are age cracks, but then we have the marking over the top. So it's a later addition. When you can look at paintings themselves in the museum complex, you can see that some of the inscriptions have been completed, but some of them are left as is. And some have been reworked over painting. So indicators that there have been some change. We also use ultraviolet fluorescence to look at paintings. And when we use UV, we can see where modifications have occurred. So this is it under visual light, and this is it under ultraviolet light, and it tells you where things have actually changed to the painting and there've been some modifications. Using ultraviolet examination further, we can see where maybe there have been some restorations, and you can see these modifications in the purple and the fluorescence. And you know, who has actually done them? Are they a professional conservator, a non-professional conservator, an artist? Have they been conserved by the same hand or not? There is archival evidence about them being conserved in the 1950s. Another question we have is overpaint. So where someone has come in and painted over a painting, or on the other hand, someone might have tried to clean a painting and cleaned it too much or cleaned it not enough. All of those questions to conservation are very important to think, what is the ideal surface? Do we want to conserve the painting back to their original state? Or all of these adaptations or changes, do they tell us something about the care of the paintings, society, and our valuing of these paintings? And so therefore, should they be retained? So we did do some various types of analysis to the paintings to identify some of the elements. Now, when we did any analysis, it was non-invasive, meaning we did not take any samples. These are national cultural treasures, so therefore the concept of sampling is something we really did not want to get involved with. So we analysed with non-invasive techniques the ground layer, so that's the first layer on the canvas painting. And in some instances, the ground layer had barium sulfate, zinc oxide, and titanium white. And in some cases, the ground layer only had barium sulfate. So in this sense, where we have materials that are more in line of the period of the time, 1821, that's telling you that this painting here, barium sulfate, was around in 1821, is more in line and more consistent with the time period. Whereas when we found pigments like zinc oxide and titanium white, these pigments came into being after their creation. So it's telling you that there has been some adaptation. We also looked at resins on the surface. These are aged resins. Over time, they have become brown and they have reticulated and pulled together. We investigated types of resins that may have been available in the Philippines. It has been recorded in church records. You do have the balao tree in the Philippines, a fantastic resin source. So were artists at that time, were they knowledgeable about these sources? And did they apply them to paintings? These are further research questions that would be very important to help with the provenance of the painting. But looking at the paintings as they are, we can theoretically say that, yes, this is an original surface. We would not get that age quality otherwise. Another approach we took was comparing the images. So in this case, we were looking at some of the identities of soldiers and the insurgents and how they were painted to see whether there were modifications or whether they were painted in the same stylistic way, to say whether it was the 14 Basi Revolt paintings were painted as a whole by one person or they were painted by different people. And as you can see here with the different figures, there is variation. Now, has that variation come about through adaptations or is that variation come about at their original time of making? Looking at the horses, you can see that there are vast differences between these horses versus these types of horses that the governors were using, and then these other horses that the insurgents were on. But then again, maybe the stylistic features of these horses was related to the identities as well. So that can't be discounted, you know, whether it was an intention. We looked at the trees and those sort of particular details like birds, comets, etc. And what we did find is that when it comes to details like these, they were generally kept quite intact in terms of further conservation. And we would see lots of painting around these details and lots of cleaning around these details, but not actual cleaning of those details. So a lot of the details were in fact quite complete. And this is the type of analysis we did. As I said, we did non-invasive, so we didn't do any sampling. And in order to get those elemental details, we use portable X-ray fluorescence. And here is the handheld device that we use for that. So here are some of the results from that, and taken from this particular area here, from number 4. And we can see our percentages and list of elements that we managed to identify. And where I have put them in red, that tells us that they are not contemporary with 1821. They are later additions. They are things like zinc oxide, possibly lithophone with the barium. The lead carbonate could possibly be consistent with 1821, but also later. Titanium, later, at least 1920s. And calcium also was probably at the time as well. So then there's a question about what artistic practices were in the Philippines and what materials were available around that time, and can we compare the two to secure some sort of provenance. And there are long lists of pigments when they became available, etc., and I've listed some there, but that is very much from the perspective of a Western framework of knowledge. But what dates of introduction are relevant to the Philippines? And can we build up a database that is relevant to the Philippines? So here's a list of possible colorants that were identified in the paintings. And then here are some dates according to a Western framework. And the question is, can we start filling in the dates for the Philippines, and not just the Philippines, but different geographical places within the Philippines, to understand about supply and sourcing of materials, which would end up in these paintings, to have a verifiable and historically accurate record. Now, we do have some information about the availability of art materials to artists, and they are through, for example, I've just put some here, they are through church records. And church records often say what type of pigments were around. And these are the church records from the whole, the Baclayan parish, from 1856 to 1901. And you can go by week, and to put together a bit of a database of material availability and sourcing. And here's another example of colours that we use for a painting job in Malacalang Palace. The date is unknown, but you can see some of the pigments which were around, like Prussian blue and vermilion. And then when we did identify certain pigments, we had to think, is this also consistent with the layering technique of the painting, the technical examination? So here is some microscopic images of Basi Revolt number 8. And you can see here that there is evidence of age cracks. There is evidence of the resin. So it's looking quite original. Where there might be some variation are these sort of black sort of markings and outlines to give it more registration. So when we did do some elemental analysis with the portable XRF, these are the types of pigments which came up. And what do these pigments actually tell us? These pigments are more consistent with an 1821 date. Calcium carbonate, iron oxide, realgar orpiment with the arsenic, lead carbonate. But when we looked at other layers which appear to look more restored, adapted, layered, we can see these types of markings, and you can see it's quite milky across the surface, over here as well, working over the surface, etc. And again, we did some elemental analysis, and what type of pigments can we say have been used in this case? In this case, we can see lots of titanium white, zinc white, the cadmium reds, So they are less in line with the 1821 date and are clearly related to restorations. Another consideration too were material limitations. Have these paintings been restored? Yes, some of them had been with mariflaging. That means attaching a wooden brace on the reverse. There were some holes in the canvas. Some of them were filled and then overpainted. And the materials themselves were quite fragile, quite thin. So what could be achieved from a physical fabric point of view and what could not. So in looking at the paintings, we tried to ascertain what was original, what were adaptations. And it was Basi Revolt number 1, 3 and 11, which appeared to be most original. There are some parts which still have been adapted, but those are ones which have the most original features, whereas some were highly overpainted and had less original features. So what we were looking at was a significant variation and restoration across the 14 paintings. And there was no consistent technique. With inorganic analysis, there was the presence of titanium white, cadmium red, zinc oxide, and barium sulfate, lead white, vermilion, realgar, red lead, and that was all within the pigment range of the 1800s. However, when we found titanium white, zinc oxide, and lithophone and cadmiums, then it was much later. When we had a very simple sort of brushwork, that was more suggestive of organic content. And when we had more of a layering of paint, that was something that was more suggestive of academic style painting. So there was lots of questions about variation of technique and material limitations and what remained original and what was not. So we're at the point then thinking about, is there other ways of knowing these paintings to make our decisions in conservation? And are there other ways of doing conservation? So this led us to really question, a classical approach to conservation where we have before and after images and we treat something. We wanted to do a lot more interdisciplinary inquiry, technical art history, material science inquiry. We were thinking a lot about the authorship of the painting, the ideal state, passage of time, and thinking about whether we could use alternative conservation approaches to recontextualise these paintings. So these are some of the things we talked about. We talked about, can this painting exist in multiple ways? Do we necessarily have to commit the painting to some physical change? Or can we allow the painting to have multiple variations and imagery around it? Can we actually invest in knowing more about the painting from a research perspective and interdisciplinary perspective, rather than treating the object as a static thing and a before and after type of approach? So this is why we, well, I didn't, but the National Museum worked very closely with the University of the Philippines, and as you know, Professor Maricol Soriano, which I'm sure many of you will know, and then they undertook a large-scale digitisation project, which provided another framework to analyse these paintings. And you can see here the great work that Maricol did in making more details more visible, a greater clarity, and without actually having to clean the paintings to reveal a lot of these details and what it would have looked like. Now, the important thing about this approach, though, is knowing about, with digital cleaning, what is original and what is not. So that's where conservation came in. We needed to work with Maricol to work out how white should the painting be. Is this part original or should this part be cleaned, digitally cleaned? And here I've just got a little bit of a comparison about what the positives are of doing a conservation clean versus a digital clean. And so I would say that the end result was to focus more on the digital cleaning and to think more about multiple authenticities, to think about, what is, what isn't, to invite curiosities, and to invest in multiple realities of the paintings and a reversioning. And also it's very cost effective and low risk. And this was a really great thing, just thinking about redefining the principles of conservation and thinking about broader evidential bases. So I've come to the end of my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to further questions. Here are our very important contributors and that I was very fortunate to work with: Maricor, Anna, whom you know, Robert, who many of you know, and of course, Ray Esquera as well. We work very closely. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Dr. Tse, thank you very much for your extensive presentation about the conservation of the Basi Revolt paintings. So we now head on to the open forum, friends. You might have a number of questions to our presenters. You may type in your questions in our chat box in Zoom. And you're also streaming live in YouTube. So if you might have questions there, we also have our staff are also looking out for your questions. All right. So to facilitate the open forum, may I call on Ms. Laarni Montoy Mayor, researcher of the Fine Arts Division, as moderator. So again, you may type in your questions. Ma'am Arnie.
Hello, good morning, everyone. We're waiting for your questions. Do you have questions for our speakers? All right. Here I have a question for Ms. Malot. What were your, did you have Ms. Malot?
Yes, yes.
Uh,
Yes.
I was wondering for since since the return of the conserved pieces of Villanueva's paintings back there at the new museum at the Carousel, did you have encountered any problems when you started setting up the exhibitions? What were your concerns?
Actually, as I told you, we before the pandemic we had a lot of visitors, so like I don't know if that should be like something to also be concerned about when you have like 1,000 visitors per day inside the gallery. But right now, actually, what is very really worrisome for me and for us here is that the condition of the gallery. As you know, it's very hot also in the Ilocos, especially at this time. Since March and until May, we expect that it's really hot. So that's quite a problem for us because of course some of our facilities need to be repaired also, and we have it's been like 6 years since the complex opened, and we need more more facilities to ensure the upkeep and the conservation of the paintings. So it's more that dun sa temperature, may mga humidity, those conservation issues. And of course, another concern is that we have to rely on the conservators coming from the NM in Manila. We don't have local conservators. So even as it's especially for me who's monitoring it, like you don't really know how much is coming off, like flaking each time, because these are tiny white dots, for example, that you see on the canvas. And you can't really figure out if one dot, like how many dots are being added each time. So these things more on conservation.
All right, thank you, Paul. We have a Zoom question from John Paul Belguera. Um, in terms of conservation of the Basi Revolt paintings and the heritage structures, like the Fuerza del Pilar and the Pawai Church, who do we consider as the stakeholders, and how were they consulted regarding the conservation?
Hello. Okay, I can answer that. Actually, normally before any conservation starts, there's a technical working group that's put together, and that is comprised by of course, the main stakeholder would be the parish or the religious that are in charge of the churches, and then there would be community members. So that's what we do with all our restoration projects. So that's all part of the work, and the consultation is sometimes very long, and it can get tedious, but we always feel that it's always the best thing. So that's basically the thing. We can't really involve everyone. It's just that technical working group is formed for that purpose. Mm.
Okay. Um, we have another question. This one is from Madla. Romel, are the paintings being considered a part of our history books now? So would like to answer that
You
question.
mean history books? You mean the textbooks?
I think he was referring to the paintings po.
No, what kinds of books? Is it textbooks or? Uh,
I think he was referring to the textbooks because there's not much written about the Basi Revolt. No, it's only mostly for the locals of the Ilocos lang nakakaalam. So
that's why we're doing this forum, and then that's why we're also putting out publications, no, and more projects related to it, so that they can appreciate the paintings. So at the moment we don't have access to those who produce textbooks, but they might want to include that eventually. So as I mentioned in my talk, sometimes it's like if there are anniversaries that are commemorated, like for instance, now it's the bicentennial of the paintings. Perhaps people from those who are producing all these textbooks might start thinking about it. I mean, certainly, like for instance, the Department of Education secretary has seen it and has really appreciated it. So.
okay, thank you po. We have a question from Leymar Edralin. The idea of multiple authenticities is very fascinating. Are there parallel research on the artists who attempted to save the original work?
So maybe, Nicole, you can answer that first.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, the idea of multiple authenticities is becoming, very commonly discussed within art historical fields, curatorship, heritage, and conservation. And the idea is that when we are ever conserving something, we are actually committing it to a certain appearance or look, and we're intervening. And a big part of that is making a decision about what something should look like. But what something should look like is highly dependent on what a conservator might think, what a curator might think, what a community member might think. And those attitudes change as well. And in relation to the Basi Revolt paintings, we were deliberating this because also they're quite fragile and they're really very, very important paintings and documents. And conservators make mistakes as well. And not that I'm going to say that I would do that, but so we took this on, and we thought about it very deeply together. And it was a collective decision, and something that was really led by Anna and the National Museum and the provincial government of Ilocos. And so this idea of documenting the paintings as much as we could, getting what information we could get from the paintings at that moment of time, and then looking at digital versions of these paintings and the idea of doing digital cleaning. And and then also we can see with Marlotte's talk and Anna's talk that people are using these Basi Revolt paintings as a site for activation and dialogues, and all of these other creative outputs is another version of the Basi Revolt paintings in a way. And I think what is really important is that these paintings can create fantastic dialogue, and we want that to be a dynamic dialogue. And as soon as we're trying to always think about a before and after treatment in terms of conservation, and then intervening with it at that level, and it would take actually quite a long time to conserve these paintings. And there is some level of risk when we're undertaking conservation. So at the time, we thought it was worth investing in using these paintings as a site for activation, which many people have talked about. And I think it was a great thing to do. And also from a conservation perspective, I've talked to many artists in tropical climates, humid climates, a lot of contemporary artists, and they are taking this idea of multiple authenticities as well, where, because, you know, materials degrade very rapidly. And so sometimes they intentionally make artworks which will be destroyed, that will degrade and be damaged and no longer be around in the future. And they do that intentionally. And then they might make a copy of that material in, you know, high quality materials, and then make it in, you know, more resourceful, locally available materials. And I'm playing with those different ideas. So really enabling the idea of multiple authenticities according to, you know, the climate, the conditions, the resources, and those ideas, which is a nice way to think about artistic making. And so in a way sort of approach those ideas a little bit in relation to the Basi Revolt painting. So in terms of conservation, there wasn't a high level of conservation intervention. It was all about it being a site for activation and learning more about the paintings, and collectively learning more about the paintings and discussing them, which we are doing today. Anna, do you want to say some more, or Marlotte?
All right. Okay, we have a question from Ms. Malon. From Ms. Elisa Agabin, she said, some scholars have pointed out that the current sequencing of the paintings, based on the sequencing of the paintings on the numbering on the brass plates attached in the late 1900s, is questionable. Is National Museum looking to do further research about this? And if yes, how?
Ako ba?
Yes.
Ayan. Lisa Gavin is the colleague I mentioned about. No? Yeah, I think it's very important that now that Dr. Labrador brought up the idea of a Basi Revolt trail, that should all help us. But as of now, personally, I still have to think about it, like the sequencing. I know that Lisa has also been discussing with historian friends, and they do think that there should be a resequencing of the panels, but that's Dr. Labrador will be the best person to answer that, because it's not as in you want to change it and you just change it. It involves a lot of work before you can do that. Yeah.
Okay, that's why we took out the those brass kind of captions in the what do you call this? The One Luna paintings, because I think it's very arbitrary, and that perhaps even the text at the bottom of the paintings may have been put afterwards. No? And this is why we started that dialogue with eminent Ilocanos like Liz Agabin, to contribute to the discussion. And you know, this is the wonderful thing about paintings. You can move them around. That's why I didn't want to subscribe to the idea that it's like the Via Crucis or the Stations of the Cross, because I think that's the power of the paintings. You can actually have different sequences for that, depending on, for instance, what we want to convey to the viewers, and you know, it might make it even interesting. We don't have to follow one narrative. There can be, you know, like the same way that Nicole said about multiplicities of authenticities. There could also be that the different interpretations. So I suppose there will be like a great debate between those from the north and those from the south, you know, things like that. And so I mean that would be healthy and make the paintings more interesting, and then be at the center of discussions.
All right, thank you po. To Miss Malot, Monina Cabanada has a question for you, ma'am. Uh, she's asking, once the Basi Revolt Trail is traced, will a walking trail be open to the public, something like the Spanish Trail in Atok Benguet?
Again, you know, well, I can only talk from my personal point of view, no? When it comes to things like this, like tourism, and we are talking now about tourism, when you talk about the trails being open to the public, for example, it it depends on a lot of things. So you have to consider not only the, you know, the communities along these trails, for example, the environment. What would it take for you to like retrace, for example? Maybe it will involve cutting of a lot of forest just to have that trail if you want it to be open to the public. What I'm saying is that we have to consider a lot of things. No, it's not just like uh, we're not doing research just to make it like or we're not doing we're not doing these studies to make more tourism sites, for example. No, it's way beyond that. The objective is not you know, like tourism can be done, but it should always be based on uh, you know, like you should always think about sustainability and conservation along the way. And we're not talking only about heritage material or heritage sites, but we're talking about communities along the way.
All right, thank you po. Okay, we have a YouTube question from Leonardo Aguinaldo. He's asking, what's the meaning of the comet and the palm on the painting stuff?
Okay, I maybe well, if I haven't if I wasn't so clear earlier on, no, my mother told me this when I was very young. No, when you see a comet, there's it's an omen, like something bad is going to happen, like maybe there's going to be war somewhere nearby, maybe there's going to be like drought that will cause famine, a disaster, an earthquake, basta it's like a portent of something bad that's coming. But of course we know that historically, there was really a comet in 1807, and we know now that it was the Great Comet of 1807. Yet, we can see like that the people, like all these generations, the people would associate the appearance of a comet with this disasters or wars. About the palm, okay. As I said, no, like I've always interpreted it as a palm, but in December 2018, when I had a like colleague from the National Museum in Manila, she said it's a comet. What? How can it become a comet? And then she said, yeah, some scholars said it like it's the tail of a comet, but as you know, if I haven't read anything yet, then I wouldn't know. I wouldn't relate it, and no one so far none of our museum, at least the people who I toured inside the gallery, I've never heard anyone saying that it's a comet. Those figures that look like leaves. But the question would be like, why is it white? But that's the artist's interpretation. So we don't really know. But it's kind of exciting to have all these interpretations, and I think what is more important is to know, to learn about these different interpretations, and also to know where they're coming from. Because when I say it's a palm, I would relate the palm itself as a symbol of victory, and you can relate that to, for example, where you're in the Christian era, you can think about the palms on Palm Sunday. And Dr. Labrador asked me to write about that last year also. Yeah.
Okay, we
Thank
have
you.
thank you, ma'am. We have a question from Nick Pichay. He's asking, in your assessment, was the painting done by only one person or were they drawn by various people?
Would you like to answer that, Nicole, or should I? Very tricky.
Yes, it is very tricky, and I'm not the person to answer it either. I looked at the painting from a technical point of view, but it was a question that we kept asking each other, and we kept having a dialogue about it. So from a technical point of view, that's why we were looking at different details and comparing them across the images and different types of application of paint and the way it was built up. And from a technical point of view, there was variation stylistically and the types of paint. But the thing is that a painting doesn't have to be painted by a single person either. It can be painted collectively. So maybe someone came along and painted the figures, and then someone else did the background and someone else did the horses. We actually don't know much about painting production during that time. So sharing the information and building up that record, from communities and things, and some experts, parish priests, etc., will have a clearer idea of that, I think. Yeah. Someone else can answer.
Yeah, it's also kind of one of our concerns. That's why we raised that when we started working with Nicole and also with Maricor, is that because they're different. Like when you made comparisons, for instance, with the horses and human figures, they're all different. And so, I mean, for me, it's not so bad that it's not um, that Esteban Villanueva who did it, but it's also this notion that came out, I think, only in the 19th century, with the painter being a lone figure and very isolated and just himself. But actually, in the past, painting production would involve a number of people, like in their taller or their studio. So that's one of the things that we need to look into. But it's actually really very interesting once you look at the paintings and compare, isolate the figures from each of them, and then you can see that it looks like different hands really made different artists were involved.
All right, thank you, ma'am. For Dr. Nicole, Tenta Nina has a question for you, ma'am. In summary of your findings, would you say that the condition of the works reflects more recent interventions, or do we see several stages of restoration? And can these restoration events be dated, or perhaps they align with the movements of the collection between locations and even owners?
I think your question has already answered itself.
Okay.
It's true. There's probably various stages of restoration, and Anna and Malott gave a very good account of where the paintings had gone and travelled, and how they'd been part of different exhibitions and events and things. And generally speaking, before an exhibition, you look at a collection, you say, oh, is it is it good enough to be exhibited? So we probably can correlate, you know, moments of restoration to exhibitions or events. And we did see various stages. The thing is, you know, building up that evidence and making it verifiable. So at the moment, we would say that yes, there are various stages, but we can't actually pinpoint when those stages were.
All right, thank you, ma'am. We have one more question, I think, from EJ Cabrera. I think you cannot fully rely on artwork as the primary basis in history. Artworks could be altered in order to utilize, or it's just a comment, no? A political, okay. Okay, I'm still checking if we have questions, more questions. Okay, from Jacob. Okay, did I miss anything?
Question from Jimbo Fatalia, ma'am.
Jean Natalia.
Yes.
What was the question? Okay, let me check. From who?
Yeah. I can read it. You can.
Okay, can you please?
So from Mr. Jimbo Fatalia, while it is amazing how all these narratives surrounding the Basi Revolt paintings gradually unfold before our eyes, with the paintings being tied to the Basi Revolt of 1807, does the NMP have an initiative to incorporate local and present-day narratives in the curation and exhibition of the paintings in such ways to make the BRPs or the paintings most relevant to the local population?
Malotes also already presented about that. We are doing all these projects because we have involved the local population. And as Malot has already pointed out, she's even involved her niece, no? And so those are things that we like, you know, there are engagements like that. So we've always been very involved, and also, we've initiated some co-curation with some interest groups. So it's happening. So it might not be as obvious as maybe to Mr. Fatalia, but we have been doing our share in involving more and more people.
One last question from Miss Eliza Agabin again. Ma'am Arnie,
From
that would be our last question. I think
from
this is
whom?
directed to Dr. T.
Okay, she's asking, do you see any possible linkages between the paintings in the Palacio Arroso Bispado attributed to Juan Arceo and the paintings of Esteban Villanueva in terms of art history, materials used, styles, etc.?
Anna, do you want to answer that question? Or Malot, you'd be more familiar. I've seen the paintings once. So I'm not an expert at all.
No, we don't see any connection. Juan Arceo has his own technique. When we were doing the conservation of one of the bishops, no, he's really very skillful, you know, and his strokes are um, very particular, no, he obviously he's had a lot of training in terms of the his painting processes, techniques, and style. So and it was wonderful actually to also digitally clean that with the help of a photographer, actually, Benji Toda. In terms of the Basi Revolt itself, it's not as straightforward as that. And that's why I find that more interesting than the Arceo painting. So, because of the seemingly different artists involved in creating the images.
Okay, I think we have another, this would be the last question, I think, from Jimbo Fatalia. He says, while it is amazing how all these narratives surrounding the Basi Revolt paintings gradually unfold before our eyes, with the paintings being tied to the Basi Revolt of 1807, and thereby contributing to Ilocano
Uh,
historiography.
I need that's been read already.
It's been read,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Okay, so I guess that would be all. Do you have other questions?
Ma'am Arnie, one
Yes,
Ryan Raquel.
from,
from Ayan Raquel, I messaged it to you.
from Ian Raquel.
Last question.
She's asking, there are new works about the Basi Revolt by contemporary artists. Is it possible to mount exhibitions that will include the new works together with the Villanueva paintings?
I already answered that, Ayan. No, we don't have any plans of putting in. For one thing, we don't have the space for it. Those are very large works. They're enormous. We also don't want to crowd out we have the original. We're very happy with the Basi Revolt paintings. And I think they were created actually for other spaces, very specific spaces, like Mark Cosico's 10 feet tall painting will not fit in the galleries, and also because we really don't want to make the Basi Revolt paintings diminutive in that sense. We, I think, have enough from these contemporary artists, like Robert Fileo and also Mark Cusico, and also Antipas de Lotavo, and they were actually commissioned specifically for that space, and so we can't. It's not really part of our curatorial direction for the Basi Revolt paintings.
Okay. All right. The question and answer segment ends here. So we appreciate all the questions coming from our audience. And of course, thank you to our speakers, Dr. Labrador, Ms. Engel, and Dr. Che. Thank you po. Okay, Dan.
Okay. Thank you to our speakers and to our participants who sent their questions. I know that you have a lot of questions, but you can contact us at the Fine Arts Division. You can send us your questions through email, and we will make sure that our speakers could attend to your questions after this webinar. So we quite extended a lot of time, but we're happy that we were able to generate a lot of questions from our participants. So for this juncture, allow me to read the certificates of appreciation to our three speakers. Pambansang Museo ng Pilipinas, National Museum of the Philippines. Certificate of appreciation is hereby awarded to Dr. Nicole Tse for her invaluable time and effort as speaker during the webinar and online launch of the book Decoding the Basi Revolt Paintings by Esteban Villanueva on April 23, 2021 at the National Museum of the Philippines. Given this 23rd day of April at the National Museum of the Philippines, Manila, signed by our Director General Jeremy Barnes, CESO 3. This same certificate is also awarded to Dr. Ana Maria Teresa Labrador, our Deputy Director General for Museums, and also to our Administrative Officer at the National Museum Ilocos, Mama Maria Lourdes Aingel. Thank you to our dear speakers for their time and their knowledge sharing during this webinar. So I believe that you have questions if our Basi Revolt painting book monograph is available. Yes, it is. We are still on the process of doing the pricing for the book, but we will inform you through our social media accounts if we are open for the selling of the books. But now allow me to share screen the link for the free ebook of the Basi Revolt painting. So while you're waiting for the physical copy of the book, you may check on this link. It is also pasted on our Zoom chat. Okay. Is it shared? Okay. I think I'll share. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I hope you were able to see the. Okay. Okay. All right. Sorry for the technical glitch. So that is the link for the free copy of the ebook, The Basi Revolt Paintings. All right. So to end the webinar, may I call on once again Ms. Laarni Montemayor for her closing remarks.
Okay, in behalf of the National Museum Fine Arts Division, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to our resource speakers, Dr. Ana Labrador, Ms. Maria Lourdes Ingel, and Dr. Nicole Chip for sharing with us the history and provenance, the concerns and importance of the conservations, and the significance of this national cultural treasure. Um, thank you for this wonderful opportunity to learn from you, and we look forward to inviting you again in our future webinars. And to our participants, thank you all for being here today. Keep safe and enjoy the rest of it.
Okay, so our technical team is requesting for a group photo. So please smile in your laptop cameras. Technical team is taking the photo. Miss Jen, by your cue. Miss Jen, okay? Okay, ready, smile. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, everyone. Oh, our technical team is inviting everyone to like and subscribe to our official YouTube page, the National Museum of the Philippines. If you have time, and please continue to follow our social media accounts. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you again soon. Stay safe. Thank you, Doc, Doc Anna, Doc Nicole, and Mamalot. And for the evaluation, please, for you to secure a certificate of attendance. The link is in the Zoom chat. Thank you, everyone. Salamat po.